Let me get to some things that we need to do in order to introduce the speaker. So Dean Apple has opened our evening with her welcome to the Honors College, and now let me welcome you to our Ross M. Lence Master Teachers Series for 2026. This annual event, inaugurated in 2009, honors the memory of Ross Lence by paying tribute to other master teachers. We've had many: Harvey Mansfield, Jim Shapiro, Diana Schaub last year, who spoke about Lincoln quite memorably, John Briggs in 2016, Dr. Crider's own teacher and close friend, and many others, as you can see from this slide. We both commemorate and celebrate Ross's legacy in honors by recognizing the art of teaching in our invited speakers over the past 17 years, a tradition that the Honors College is committed as an institution to continuing in observing. We also have paid tribute in the program this year to two of our own renowned teachers in honors, who have recently retired from active duty, shall we say, in the college, Dr. Ted Estes and Dr. Terry Hallmark. You'll see them at the back of the program on the next to last page if you flip to it. Ted could not be here this evening because he is now in Santa Fe, where his son and his family are living. Professor Estes, before he left Houston, asked me to convey his warm regards to the gathering and especially to the Lencians in attendance. He's sorry not to be here. Our colleague and good friend Terry Hallmark is here this evening. Of course he is. This event itself owes as much to Terry as to anyone, for in his respect for Ross, as a teacher and as a good human being, Terry has kept the stories of the reasonable Mister's antics alive, especially for those of us who arrived here only after the good doctor had shuffled off his mortal coil and departed, leaving those of us who did not know him in person to learn about him through this event or from students of his like Terry and many of the other Lencians here this evening. After more than 3 decades of part-time and full-time teaching in the political science department, Bauer, and the Honors College, Terry officially retired as of this academic year. But as a few of you will know, in particular his students here tonight, and there are more than a few, we've coaxed him back into the classroom to teach an occasional course, and we're grateful that he has agreed. His courses in ancient, medieval, and early modern political philosophy, American political thought, and especially American foreign policy, have become the stuff of legend. He was also the director of the Energy and Sustainability minor for many years, but since he is shy about his accomplishments, which are substantial, in teaching and for decades as a political risk analyst, let me brag about him and say that he has just spent much of the past 2 years working to bring about, co-edit, and contributed chapter to a festschrift in honor of his teacher and our Lence speaker in 2013, Bill Allen. The title of that work is indicative of the profoundly reflective love of country embraced by both the volume's honoree and its editor. And the title of the volume is The Character of America, celebrating the semi-quincentennial of American independence, to be published this year. So in this, his first year of formal retirement, we wanted to recognize his legacy as a teacher in the Honors College. And so if he will permit me in the indulgence and remain seated, the rest of us, please rise, and I invite you to join me in thanking Terry for being one of our own master teachers. I'm going to get in trouble for that later. Now, I also want to say something about the Lyceum Initiative. The Lyceum Initiative is dedicated to renewing civic education as part of the academic mission of the college and of the university, as inscribed in UH's founding charter. Our purpose with the Lyceum Initiative is patriotic and civic, but not partisan, to prepare students for thoughtful citizenship in a constitutional republic by fostering the virtues of mind and of heart that sustain a free people. In pursuing this purpose through the Lyceum Initiative, the Honors College joins a national movement in higher education dedicated to reclaiming civic learning and civic virtue as essential elements of our liberal education and of American citizenship. civic knowledge, and an understanding of the fundamental principles of our constitutional order establish the only true foundation for reasonable civic discourse, as well as for civic engagement and leadership. A young Abraham Lincoln foresaw the need for this obligation and duty of citizens in his Lyceum address. In an 1838 speech at the Young Men's Lyceum, Lincoln gravely warned his fellow citizens of the dire threat posed to the nation by the political violence which accompanied the gradual erosion of respect for the rule of law and reverence for a constitutional order. The perpetuation of our political institutions, he argued, depended upon enlightened citizenship and reflective patriotism. For each generation must renew its devotion to constitutional self-government if the republic is indeed to endure. A commitment is thus required in each generation to renew that revolutionary spirit which, in Lincoln's words, had first founded the temple to liberty and to equality. That is the commitment we've embraced here in the Honors College with the inauguration of our Lyceum Initiative. Tonight we have here as well many of the Lyceum Fellows. If you would rise. These are students in the Honors College who are the inaugural Lyceum Fellows, and they are doing research on the Declaration of Independence as well as on the Texas Constitution. Now, our lecture tonight is not only the Lence keynote address, but also the second in our 2026 lecture series dedicated to this mission, celebrating the semi-quincentennial anniversary of the founding of our nation, with the signing of the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776. Jefferson, in 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration, looked back with pride on that time, 1/2 century prior, and on his words, which, as he wrote, gathered together an expression of the American mind, a profound expression that would become, for Lincoln, a charter of timeless, cherished principles for our nation and the sheet anchor of American republicanism. So now let me turn to this evening's keynote speaker, who has taken as his theme the very nature and character of that declaration. Dr. Crider is professor of English at the University of Dallas, where he has taught for more than 30 years. His BA and MA from California State University in Sacramento, and his Ph.D. is from the University of California, Riverside. I first met Dr. Crider when he was an incoming tenure-track professor in the English department at the University of Dallas, where I was an outgoing doctoral student. And although I had completed all the courses for my degree requirements, I could not leave the university until I audited one of his courses. And that course was on rhetoric, the notes for which I still have in my office. Now, Dr. Crider is an award-winning teacher at the University of Dallas, where he has received all 3 of their most prestigious Teaching Excellence Awards. Having taught more than 30 preps as a teacher, he also directed his university's undergraduate writing program, envisioning and designing a framework for undergraduate academic essay writing that is structured around the classical canons of rhetoric. This framework he then incorporated into his first academic book, which you have on your tables. It is a best-selling work called The Office of Assertion, an art of rhetoric for the academic essay. Now, for many years, I lived on the University of Dallas Rome campus, and so did Dr. Crider, together with his wife, Trang, who is here this evening. Dr. Crider lived and taught at the University of Dallas Rome campus, where he and his wife explored the rich historical and cultural treasures of the region outside of Rome called the Castelli Romani. Their memories of living in such a legendary location are poignantly recounted in their co-authored and recently published travel memoir, also on your table, Love Among the Castelli Romani. They both tell me it's a love letter to Italian cuisine, history, culture, and the Italians who they encountered on their journey. Both of those books are on the table. If you're interested, please take them with you. It's our gift. Dr. Crider's areas of academic specialization, though, are Shakespeare and rhetorical studies. He's written 2 books focused on a reading of the former, of Shakespeare. His 2009 book, With What Persuasion, an essay on Shakespeare and the ethics of rhetoric, studies the ethics of rhetoric as an action, which is to say, rhetoric as the art of leading our souls with words, an activity predicated upon and surpassed only by the pursuit of wisdom. His 2019 book, a decade later, titled The Art of Persuasion, Aristotle's Rhetoric for Everybody, returned to the source of our classical understanding of the art of rhetoric. All this to say that Dr. Crider is, in fact, a master teacher, a gentleman scholar, and one of our finest students today of the classical art of rhetoric, an art which we are much in need of. So it is with great pleasure that we look forward to his keynote address this evening, titled The Pen's Virtue, Style as Rhetorical Character in Jefferson's Declaration. Dr. Crider.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much, Professor Gish, for your generous introduction, and also for hosting me and Mrs. Crider during our stay. We've had a fabulous time the past 2 or 3 days. I'd like to thank the University of Houston Honors College, the Ross M. Lence Endowment, and the community of students and faculty here for your hospitality and your intellectual friendship. The highest compliment that I can pay the students that I've encountered here is that they remind me of UD students, many of whom are here this evening, which is really quite heartening. I'm honored and humbled by the invitation. As Professor Gish was explaining, John Briggs was my teacher, Paul Cantor was his teacher. You're bound to be disappointed if you know their work, but it's heartening for me anyway to be in their line. I would like to dedicate this talk to Professor Dustin Gish, colleague and friend, and to simply say that friendship with you, Dustin, is a liberal education. Thank you. This is the Jeffersonian writing desk from the National Museum of American History. Your monument shall be my gentle verse, which eyes not yet created shall o'erread, and tongues to be your being shall rehearse when all the breathers of this world are dead. You still shall live, such virtue hath my pen, where breath most breathes, e'en in the mouths of men. Introduction, style as character, and Jefferson as writer. I shall begin with an admission. I am neither a scholar of Jefferson nor a political philosopher or historian. My knowledge is of the art of rhetoric or persuasion, especially as that art is manifest in literature. And this evening I want to explore Thomas Jefferson as a writer and his Declaration of Independence as a work of literature. My subject is the declaration in his autobiography. He was so proud of his composition that he had it published there with the committee's revisions, some invisibly accepted, some visually noted. For a good deal of his life, he seemed really to resent the fact that anybody made any revision suggestions to him about the document. Though he wrote the declaration as part of a committee, one that included John Adams and Ben Franklin, though he drew often direct inspiration from contemporaneous compositions, and though the Second Congress offered numerous revisions, it is fair to say that he is the author of the Declaration. I say that because that's under some dispute in the scholarship where his agency is downplayed. Though Ezra Pound helped T.S. Eliot revise The Wasteland, a poem full of borrowings from other works, we still designate Eliot as the poem's author. My argument is this: Jefferson establishes his own writerly character in part through his style. I am an English teacher, by the way. And such writerly character becomes America's national character. Writerly character is one way to translate ethos or persona, the appeal in classical rhetoric to the character of the speaker as revealed in the written or spoken work itself. Such character is disclosed not only through invented and arranged arguments, but also through style. Lexis, or elocutio. Jefferson's character comes through not just what he says, or the order in which he says it, but how he says it, his words, and his words together. That is, his sentences. The form of a sentence is not merely a value-neutral tool of thought. As Richard Weaver explains in The Ethics of Rhetoric, quote, language is not a purely passive instrument, but owing to its public acceptance, while you are doing something with it, it is doing something with you, or with your intention. It does not exactly fight back, although sometimes it does. Rather, it has a set of postures and balances, which somehow modifies your thrusts and holds. The sentence form is certainly one of these sets. A writer's style may be characterized by its diction, syntax, sentence type or length, and figures of speech, all of which make up such a set. Although Jefferson never, throughout his career, wrote in imaginative forms, no poems, no plays, no narratives, he was nonetheless a creative writer whose reading habits equipped him with all the literary means he needed to write a nation and a national character into existence. Let's see how he did that in his declaration. Part 1, the introduction, not mine, his, hypotaxis, diction, and cosmopolitanism. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. The classical rhetorical tradition distinguishes between two dominant styles, the paratactic and the hypotactic, relying on what we would call the compound sentence or the complex. The former coordinates clauses, the latter subordinates them. Weaver argues that each style has a distinct effect. The compound sentence balances coordinated elements into an ordered whole. The complex sentence creates subordination among parts along various grades of evaluation. The paratactic style then relies upon the coordinate conjunction, the hypotactic, the subordinate conjunction, and the relative pronoun. Although there are writers who so heavily favor one or the other, Hemingway, for example, the paratactic, and Henry James, the hypotactic, most writers employ both, as we will see that Jefferson indeed does. Even so, his opening sentence, which makes up his introduction, is fundamentally hypotactic. It is a complex sentence that might have done James proud. Its deep structure is an opening dependent clause followed by an independent one. If you don't like English grammar this evening, you will probably suffer. Professor Gish invited an English teacher here. Blame him. When X, Y. When it becomes necessary, a decent respect requires. Of course, it's more involved than that, since there is coordination within the dependent clause, and the independent is followed by a dependent. But the rhetorical effect of the deep structure is revealed in the subordinate conjunction when, which provides the time and circumstance of the introduction's central predication. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires. The declaration declares itself relative to its historical moment and the exigencies of colonial rebellion. But under the obligation to respect what the world thinks, although there is here military consideration, since the colonies will need support from France and they will receive it, there is something more. American cosmopolitanism. that sense that we claim to be exemplary of a worldwide commitment to certain forms of political life. I prefer American exemplariness to American exceptionalism, but it's probably not a major point. Although a Virginian, Jefferson was a man of the world, one beholden to declare to the world why he thought the colonies should rebel. From this moment on, Jefferson's ethos as a cosmopolitan would be America's. Our predilection to declare ourselves to the world comes from Jefferson's pen. And although this predilection can be read as grandiloquent self-importance, it arises, according to Jefferson, from boundedness to others in the world, a respect for their opinion that is decent. This Jeffersonian respect explains why so many in the world are attracted to what became the United States of America. Through it, he was creating not only his own ethos, but that of an emergent nation. Not only that of an emergent nation, but also that of a new world desire. Desire for what? A political form of life in accordance with the laws of nature and of nature's God. Jeffersonian cosmopolitanism will become paradoxical historically. Sometimes an imperial imposition of tyranny upon others, sometimes a solidarity with those rebelling against tyranny. Be that as it may, through hypotaxis and apt qualification, Jefferson establishes himself and the nation he is creating with an exemplary, decent respect for the opinions of the world. Such virtue had his pen. Part 2, the principles, parallelism and science. I can't tell you how exciting it is to be able to read the Declaration of Independence in public. It's almost as good as reading a Shakespearean sonnet. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations begun at a distinguished period and pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. The first sentence of the Declaration's second paragraph is its most famous, and most of us in this room will have memorized at least part of its principles of self-governance and the right to revolution. It is the most remarkable sentence in American literature. Like the first paragraph's only sentence, it is complex. Its opening, independent clause establishes Americans as a people through their belief in truths. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. We are a we who together agree, without argument, that these truths are self-evidently true, self-evident because axiomatic." Jefferson is about to lay out the first principles of America, the truths holding us together because we hold them to be true. What truths? His demonstrative adjective, the these of these truths, is anticipatory and hints to us that the 5 following that clauses catalog what we hold as both self-evidently true and structurally valid. Jefferson composes these valid truths in parallel structure. Parallelism is a figure of speech which encourages the writer to design phrases and clauses in like grammatical structure when they are doing like work, and it is one of the writer's resources for writing long sentences, since the parallel structure keeps the reader on track through a subtle form of repetition, not of words, but of grammatical forms. Like any repetition, though, it must be varied so as not to grow tedious. Style requires both rhythm and variation. Let's look at Jefferson's 5 dependent clauses carefully to see how this syntactical rhythm and variation enact the principled scientific character of his ethos and our nation. Allow me to assume without argument this evening that Jefferson's reasoning is sound, which I think it is. Instead, indulge me in revealing the reasoning as syntactically parallel. The 5 increasingly long dependent clauses are each introduced with that, here a subordinate conjunction, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By the way, Walter Isaacson has a small book out on the greatest sentence ever written, which takes up the Declaration of Independence. And he says that the first sentence stops with the pursuit of happiness, which is actually not the case. He left off 2 clauses. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. You can even hear the parallelism. And to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. First, notice that the parallel clauses become longer as the sentence progresses. Clause 1 is 6 words long, Clause 2, 12, Clause 3, 11, Clause 4, 27, Clause 5, 55. Except for the almost equal length of clauses 2 and 3, the pattern is roughly a doubling of length with each clause. I just finished teaching a class in the art of the sentence, and also I'm now teaching a course in senior novel in which students are learning how to analyze their novelist's style. And they were absolutely horrified when I told them, yes, you're going to actually have to count the number of words in your author's sentences. They had that look that only students can give you. Unbelievable. Although this parallelism is serving Jefferson's political science, its structure rolls rhetorically from a recognition of equality to a demand for revolution and reconstitution. The first dependent clause establishes the pattern. All men are created equal, which creates the subject plus verb plus predicate adjective pattern. The second clause follows, then varies it. They are endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights, has as its subject a third person personal pronoun they, whose antecedent is clearly men, and as its verb a passive construction requiring a double prepositional phrase for the agent of the action of endowing and what they are endowed with, rights. My own hunch is that Jefferson preferred inherent and inalienable to the committee's certain inalienable rights because the and emphasizes something he favors throughout, double or triple units in parallel structure. The third clause breaks the parallelism with an opening prepositional phrase and a parallel yet varied triplet. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The fourth clause returns to the pattern of the first and second clause. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The opening infinitive phrase illuminates the passive verb's purpose, that passive verb parallel to the second clauses, then varies the pattern with a terminal double participial phrase from the consent of the governed. The fifth clause, remember the longest, varies the deep pattern most, opening with a dependent clause of its own whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, before offering its revolutionary mandate with an expletive, a series of parallel infinitives, another of parallel participial phrases, and concluding with the new government's purpose, the same as the old ones. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. I take safety to encompass life and liberty, and happiness, the pursuit of happiness. That was a bit thick, wasn't it? My apologies for that. It probably could be clearer to hear. It's absolutely clear to read. Trust me. The second and third sentences of the second paragraph, both compound complex with internal parallelism, refute a possible objection that subjects will revolt without sufficient cause, and repeat not only the right but also the duty to revolt. But in its first sentence, Jefferson's parallel structure of his dependent clauses for his scientific governing principles, those he is persuading us are ours if we are part of the we, combined with the increasing length of the clauses, creates a moving articulation of the axioms of his ethos and Americas, those of a new science of politics, not only cosmopolitan, but also principled. Such virtue had his pen. Part 3, the particulars. Anaphora, the simple sentence and the appeal to indignation. We're an angry people. Before his second paragraph ends, Jefferson makes his principal accusation against George III's rule over the colonies, that is, that it is a tyranny. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to expunge their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of unremitting injuries and usurpations, among which no one fact stands singly or solitary to contradict the uniform tenor of the rest, but all have in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world, for the truth of which we pledge a faith unsullied by falsehood. The accusation needs to be proven to trigger the right to revolution, and Jefferson closes the second paragraph with an introduction to his catalog of instances of the king's tyranny. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world, for the truth of which we pledge a faith unsullied by falsehood. The committee prudently cut the last prepositional phrase. Jefferson wanted included. Jefferson's facts are really generalizations, whose factual basis is left unexplored. I presume because his American audience will allow them, and detailing each would lengthen his document to unwieldy a scale. Jefferson offers his accusations against royal tyranny, each accusation receiving its own paragraph sentence, and he does so generally through not complex, but simple or compound sentences, much shorter than the sentences in the first and second paragraphs, and the figure of speech known as anaphora, the repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of successive clauses. Both syntax and figure of speech arouse his primary audience's indignation at the injustice of tyranny. There's a connection here between style and appeal, here the emotional appeal. These accusations remind us that Jefferson's rhetorical genre is not only deliberative, but also judicial. Remember, he was a lawyer. The first 15 accusations all begin the same way. with the third person singular personal pronoun and the present perfect form of the verb indicating the crime. He has X'd. He has refused. He has forbidden. He has refused. He has called together. He has dissolved. He has refused. He has endeared. He has suffered. He has made. He has erected. He has kept. He has affected. He has combined. He has abdicated. In case, as auditors or readers, we've missed the anaphora, he rounds out this part of his catalog thus. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. I don't know about you, but I'm indignant. The anaphora establishes the catalog, and the shorter sentences, simple or compound, arouse an audience's indignation at the injustice of each fact. Notice style assists invention. Here the emotional appeal in anger in response to injustice, which is a legitimate emotional appeal. Aristotle believes that if you are not angry in the presence of injustice, you are insensible. He pauses the anaphora to vary it, though, in the next accusation. Watch this, it's remarkable. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the work of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy unworthy the head of a civilized nation. By shifting from the present perfect tense to the present progressive, Jefferson makes the present threat vivid. He then shifts back to the anaphoric pattern to complete his accusations. He has constrained, he has endeavored, he has incited, he has waged. I'm going to take up that last accusation, by the way, in a moment. Jefferson then frames the injustices both by defending the colonial response to them. Excuse me. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injuries. Notice the parallel balance of repeated petitions and repeated injuries. And by castigating both the prince and parliament for neglect and repeated injustice, then adding to the appeal to indignation one to disappointed affection. After arguing that the colonists have peacefully but unsuccessfully petitioned their British king and brethren, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injuries, Jefferson rounds out the inductive portion of the declaration thus. These facts have given the last stab of agonizing affection, and manly spirit bids us to renounce forever these unfeeling brethren. We must endeavor to forget our former love for them, and to hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We might have been a free and great people together, but a communication of grandeur and of freedom, it seems, is below their dignity. Be it so, since they will have it so. The road to happiness and to glory is open to us too. We will tread it apart from them and acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our eternal separation. Jefferson's chiasmus, the figure of inverted grammatical structure and antithesis, holding their British brethren enemies in war, in peace, friends, was so good that the Congress and committee moved it to the end of the paragraph. And it must be admitted, sorry Tom, an improvement. Be that as it may, Jefferson's anaphora-assisted appeal to indignation established his ethos and ours as a man and a nation, cosmopolitan, principled, and righteously indignant. Such virtue had his pen. Part 3. The committee's revisions and the revelation of implicit hypocrisy. So far, I have not looked very often at the committee or Congress's revisions of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, whether those he quietly accepted or those he publicly rejected in his autobiography's edition of the text. There is one substantial revision I do want us to examine, though. The final accusation Jefferson makes against George III, that the king is responsible for American slavery. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain. He's furious. He's starting to all cap. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce. And that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye, he's now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people upon whom he has also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with the crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. This is such a strange, if not Gothic moment of explicit hypocrisy. A man articulating principles of equality for all men, while scapegoating someone else for the fact that Jefferson himself owned men as slaves. The repeated term men here from, quote, all men are created equal, refutes, I maintain, the common idea that Jefferson did not intend to include all people in the principle of equality. The committee prudently excised the whole psychologically bizarre passage that sympathizes with the enslaved and yet is terrified by the prospect of their legitimate rebellion against slavers, and by doing so buried the explicit hypocrisy within an implicit one that will work itself out, of course, within American history during the Civil War and beyond. As well, it tells you quite a bit about the committee and Jefferson that they let stand a similar moment of exclusion of Native Americans from the Declaration's principle of equality. He has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions of existence. And in a March 31st, 1776 letter, Abigail Adams, one of my very favorite ladies, Abigail Adams reminded her husband John that the Revolution needed to include women. I desire that you would remember the ladies, whom in fact he forgot. Exclusions of some people from the we is, of course, at the heart of American history and our current cultural wars over the American founding. It's true, the accusation of hypocrisy is easy for us now, but it must be made. Otherwise, one is dishonest. Even so, I would want to distinguish between two forms of hypocrisy, that downward and that upward, a distinction I owe to the literary critic Wayne Booth. One might not live up to one's ideals and be quite contented in doing so. One might, though, try to live up to them, aroused by the sting of conscience and justice, to live up to them to a greater and greater degree, to form, in Lincoln's words, a more perfect union. The battle between those two hypocrisies might define Jefferson's rhetorical character and our own throughout our national history, one battle after another, if you will. For now, I note Jefferson's failure, partially hidden by the committee in Congress as a failure. Such vice had his pen. Part 4, the conclusion, again his, not mine. Varied rhythm and courage. Jefferson has established both principles of equality and liberty, and his particulars of British tyranny. It's time for him to conclude, and he does so with the varied parallelism that characterizes the entire document. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these states, reject and renounce all allegiance and subjection to the kings of Great Britain and all others who may hereafter claim by, through, or under them. We utterly dissolve all political connection which may have heretofore subsisted between us and the people or Parliament of Great Britain. And finally, we do assert and declare these colonies to be free and independent states, and that as free and independent states, they have the power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. I find this text tremendously logical, but I also find it deeply moving. The logic of this conclusion of Jefferson's reasoning, I think, is flawless, but we forget, as heirs of the nation he helped to create, that this was a dangerous endeavor he was persuading his readers to believe and act upon. To the tyrant, a rebel is a traitor, and so revolution requires not only logical defense, but also moral and physical courage. So Jefferson returns to the we of one people that opens the Declaration, establishing an organizational frame to speak for them and us again at its close through modulated parallelism. To support the words of the text, Jefferson, as both the we of the Congress and the new nation, and the we who inherit its vision, including those of us this evening, pledges three things with and to one another: our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The anaphora of the possessive adjectives, our, there's the rhythm, establishes the verbal rhythm. The grammatical parallelism then deepens: lives, fortunes, and honor. But notice the variation within the final triple phrase of the Declaration, our sacred honor. The final pledge and the guarantor of revolutionary integrity is honor, which may mean reputation in the period, but it may also mean ethical integrity. The courageous integrity to hazard all upon what one holds to be true. This for Jefferson, for the nation, and for us is sacred. Such virtue had his pen. Conclusion, mine. You're almost there. The Declaration as national character. My argument has been both that Jefferson establishes his rhetorical character in America's not only through his reasoning and his design, which, by the way, I'd love to talk about, but won't this evening, but also through his style, and that such rhetorical character is cosmopolitan, scientific, indignant, hypocritical, and courageous. There we are. What Jefferson wrote with his pen has also been a who, both himself and us. The influence one exercises in the Republic of Letters can also be an influence in the Republic of Nations. And when Jefferson incorporated a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled into his autobiography, and his self-description as, quote, author of the Declaration of American Independence upon his tombstone, he was revealing that he was disclosing to his fellow Americans that he saw himself not only as a thinker and a designer, but also as a writer with Shakespearean aspirations to be remembered as such. This evening I've tried to acknowledge that virtue without, however, effacing its element of vice. This raises an interesting question about American literature and history, and that is this: how do we acknowledge the virtue and the vice? As Richard Rodriguez, one of my favorite writers, points out in Brown, those who idealize Jefferson must remember that he was a slaveholder, but those who eviscerate him, that he taught America equality. And Rodriguez's own inheritance as a Mexican American reminds us of other inclusions within the we of those excluded from the promise of the Jeffersonian invention, reminding us that it was an invention of America among the Americas. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal." My answer to that question may be too simple to be helpful, the question being, how do we acknowledge the vice and the virtue? Human beings and their works are marked by both. They just are. Then again, it might be the very wisdom we need in this American moment in which we imagine we are virtuous and our enemies vicious. Jefferson was a slaveholder. Jefferson declared the equality of all. Instead of ignoring or obsessing upon his hypocrisy, we might focus on our own. What are the self-evident truths we neglect out of our own vices, and how might we become more consistent with them? Not to establish a complete integrity within and between soul and polity, but to seek a greater one. My modest contribution this evening has been, I hope, to show how that enterprise may very well be, to a degree, a matter of style. So I conclude with a more precise question. How might our own spoken and written rhetorical character be as ethical and just as possible? Thank you. Certainly. Questions?
So it seems at the end there you pointed out, he says, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. that word sacred picks up a kind of echo of a theology of the state. Some kind of notion that the state is, he says sacred, which means, has to have some meaning.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that? I mean, obviously, we're in a period in which God is disappearing off the stage, and yet he makes reference to these kind of divine rights or whatever, and links our rights to those rights. So what do you make of that?
I think it's a wonderful question. I mean, many of us know about Jefferson's Bible, in which he actually wants to cut out the sayings of Jesus from the Gospels. And believers, of course, find it slightly scandalous that he does so. Secularists find it intriguing, but the question I have is is there some basis for what Jesus says in who he is? I agree that this is a moment of transition, and that Jeffersonian deism means that it's worth talking about him not being a Christian in any sense that a Christian would recognize that. But it's also the case, it seems to me, that he does have a sense of the sacred. The question then would be, what is its origin? Where is it located? And I would say, I think he would say that it's located perhaps most in individual character and the association of individual characters. Honor is an extremely interesting word. Under the influence of Cicero, the honorable is not just that which is reputation worthy, it's also that which is good. And Cicero himself, though clearly not a Christian, believed in a kind of divine order, the gods, that sanctioned human virtue. It's not an adequate response, but I would say that I think you've had a transformation of a term that would be a shame to lose even for non-Christians, because there is something more than human, somehow, in the best moments of the human. What do you think of that response? Is it at all adequate?
Well, it's something, it seems to me the state becomes an entity here with some independent divine value way. And that what you said and what he says seem to, but you have to locate the divinity somewhere that he does refer to explicitly.
Yeah.
And as a source of rights, inalienable rights. Where do they come from?
Indeed.
I mean, it's very interesting.
It's a just question. I'm no expert. Generally, however, when I read about deism, it seems highly unlocated.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk, first of all.
Welcome.
You mentioned that Jefferson looked back at this 50 years after he'd written it, for, I guess, the 50th anniversary. In your studies, is there anything he would have changed? I mean, you said he was very happy or proud of the work, but did he indicate, is there anything he would have changed or anything that did not age the way he thought it would?
Yeah, what he does, and I'm using, those of you who've done work in the Declaration know this, it's not the most stable text in the world. What I did was to stabilize it by picking up the Library of America volume and seeing how they handled it, and then comparing it to some others. But what's very clear is that in his attempt to reproduce through underlining or insertion marks the parts that were excised or the parts that were changed, is he wanted a record not only of the text, but he wanted a record of the negotiation, if you will, of the committee. And the way that I'll put it is, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think he ever acknowledges that they improve the text in some places. And it becomes very clear that he's annoyed by their changes. Those of you who write know the painful pleasure of being edited by somebody who improves your prose style. It's ever so humbling, and it often begins with a little bit of pique and pushback. I'm working with a terribly talented editor these days at a journal that I sometimes publish in. And this fellow just continually improves my work, and it annoys me every time.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very much enjoyed your talk. Given your last charge in looking at our own view, specifically on the Declaration is now displayed in the Oval Office. I wonder how just to get your thoughts on having our chief executive now have the Declaration displayed at the room that encapsulates our executive power in the country.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I'm glad it's there. I I don't know if you've heard the president's characterization of it when he was asked by a reporter about it. It's worth YouTubing. I'll be discreet. It was more disappointing than the document's location in the office. So I think that there is we do have a tendency to valorize, if not idolize, not idealize, but idolize founding documents without always attending to them and understanding them. And so what I would say is I approve of the reverence, and I hope that it is accompanied by understanding.
Scott, after hearing your talk, I'm a little bit nervous about making a grammatical error here as I ask my question.
I'm an English teacher. It's not the first time I've heard that.
But I do want to ask a grammatical question because I've never taken the time to think about that aspect of it as much as you've helped us to do tonight. It strikes me that for a text that is so inspiring and so persuasive and so effective at moving people to do something great, that this entire text is dominated by the indicative. And I'm thinking of some contrasts like the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law. You have imperatives, or the jussives of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, let freedom ring, and so on. I just found one in here, which is let facts be submitted to a candid world.
Yeah.
And I was just curious about how does he get so much out of just the indicative, just basically reporting facts in a document that the spirit of it is anything but mere indication.
No, it's very nice. Let me first concede that I did not make that observation myself about the document. Now that you do, I think to myself, oh, that is very exciting. Well, what's interesting about the indicative, of course, is that it functions for the declarative. And so in that sense, I think that the declarative is enacting, if you will, what the declaration is doing grammatically. Why he shifts in the let facts be submitted to a candid world is very, very interesting. Do you have a response to your own question? I wanted to ask before I hazarded one, because
I'm not going to argue with you.
No, but I am curious because it's a brilliant observation. I think you're really onto something, and that exception is a very interesting moment. Why shift there at this moment that he's saying, this is what we're going to do? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. But I will certainly be thinking about it tonight when I'm trying to go to sleep and can't.
Okay, is it Monticello or Monticello?
Well, Dustin and Mrs. Crider and I lived together in Italy. So I would just say Monticello because I can't help it. I got a nod from Professor Gish. I'm good.
Well, you made me think that there'll be a time in the distant future when people won't know that Jefferson had slaves. Yeah. And that piece about excoriating the monarch for foisting slavery upon the colonies, it has a remarkable effect of immunizing him. Maybe 500 years from now, surely the Declaration will be read and known about. God willing, the empire survives that long. But do you see? When Jefferson died, photography was just getting off the ground. So the evidence, you have to go there. So I'm saying you have to go to Monticello. And I did that, and for the full import of how he lived.
No, and one of my understandings is that actually both at Mount Vernon and at Monticello, if that's the correct pronunciation, which it absolutely must be, they have just done a much, much better job more recently of bringing to historical life the facts on the ground, if you will. And I think that is progress. I mean, I think the expanding we and honesty about the American past is absolutely crucial. The key here, though, is that to put it maybe hyperbolically, we can only accuse him of hypocrisy because of the principle he gave us. And I think that is the bind, if you will, that Rodriguez catches so nicely, and that is to make the case against Jefferson, you have to be a Jeffersonian. I mean, the most Jeffersonian articulation in more recent American history, to my mind, is Malcolm X. The ballot or the bullet is actually not a bad bumper sticker for the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. And although Dr. King is often thought of as the more traditional of the two figures, I think it's the opposite. I think actually Malcolm X is a Jeffersonian. And Dr. King is, in one sense, the principle of equality, but because of his Christian opposition to violent revolution, he creates a new form of rebellion with the help, of course, of Gandhi, who had the help of Thoreau, and in fact invents a new form of political rebellion. But I think that bind is binding upon us. I just don't think we can quite escape it, which is why I think it's an assist in directing our indignation, if you will, toward ourselves, sort of our least favorite activity, but maybe the most important. But your point about the living record, will it be there or won't it? In 500 years, will people think that George III was uniquely responsible for slavery and foisted it upon poor Thomas Jefferson? I don't know.
It looked like an indictment of monarchy more than George III. Because by then, Britain had outlawed slavery.
Yes, but it was still involved in the slave trade. As I understand it, I'm not a historian.
Thank you, Professor, for being here this evening. I was not an English major. I was a political philosophy major, but wanted to get your thoughts and insights on the structure of the Declaration and how Jefferson, it just screams to me very Platonic in the beginning, this appeal to the nature of God and God's laws and the natural order, natural laws, and then he shifts it into an Aristotelian type of the political bands and how it's subservient to this Platonic notion of what the ideal is, and if it's not serving that structure, we're almost compelled to dissolve whatever form of government. And so I just want to hear what your insights are into that structure of how he composed it.
That's an extremely interesting idea. It's one way, I think, of translating what's very, very clear, and that is that he does move from the ideational to the empirical, which you might say is the move from the Platonic to the Aristotelian. That's a brilliant insight. Extremely interesting. What I like about it, in addition to the tail-biting snake of the frame, ending where he began, which is a particular favorite of mine, just aesthetically, is that move from the syllogistic or enthymematic reasoning of that second paragraph to the empirical, which supplies evidence for one of the premises, and that is that the King has in fact, and Parliament, the British Brethren, has in fact done what's being argued has been done. And so what I would say is, I mean, one question you might ask, I often say to students that if you want to know why an artist has chosen the design that he or she has chosen, change it and see what its effect is and how does it change it. What if he had begun, in your understanding, with the Aristotelian and had moved to the Platonic? I think what he gains is something that I was beginning to address, and that is he can start us in a sort of cool mode of syllogistic reasoning. But then when he goes to supply empirical evidence, especially given the parallelism, especially given the shorter, simpler, or compounded sentences, he begins to arouse indignation. And so I think one way to think about it is he's designed it so that we think and then we feel, which I think is more sensible than feeling before thinking. I mean, I don't know about you, but once my emotions are activated, it tends to be a little more difficult to think straight. Could just be me. That's a really fine insight. Thank you for that.
Well, please join me in thanking Dr.
It really was a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving me your evening.
And I'm sure if you have further questions, he will entertain them afterwards. Before we go to the close of the evening, I just wanted to point out a few things. The program, of course, and the declaration cards are yours to keep if you want to take them with you. We printed many of them, and we're going to have them at all the events, including the events that are on the poster up here. We have 3 more lectures in this series at the end of February, at the end of March, and at the end of April. You're all, of course, invited to come. On the table are also the 2 books that I was able to get of Scott's and Scott and Treng's. Those are also for you. If you're interested, if you'd like to read them, please take them with you. They're gifts of the college. And finally, if you're interested in supporting this event, which is the Ross Lence Master Teacher Series, the endowment you can support, and we would be very grateful for that. There's also a QR code to support the Lyceum Initiative endowment. So at this point, I'd like to invite Associate Dean Jonathan Williamson to give the traditional benediction for the close of the evening.
Thank you again, Professor Crider, for providing us with a thought-provoking take on Jefferson's declaration this evening and engaging us in what in the Honors College we like to call the Great Conversation. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Honors College's staff, especially Haley Baker, whose hard work made this evening's event possible. For those of you I don't know, my name is Jonathan Williamson. I'm Associate Dean of Academic Programs here in the Honors College, and I'm also a student of the reasonable Mr. Lence as a political science graduate of the University of Houston and of the Honors College. And so it is my pleasure to close our evening with a reading of the benediction that the reasonable Mr. Dr. Lence delivered at UH commencement ceremonies over the years. While I will not attempt to replicate his literal and might I say rather unique voice that still resonates in my head, as I expect it does for some of you, nasal, I can hear it. Can you? Yes. I will note that we will hear his figurative voice, both as an intellectual and as a Catholic, in his message. Even so, the content of his message will resonate for many faiths and intellectual traditions. Dr. Lence. And my apologies for my poor Latin. Salutem in Domini, may the Lord ever preserve and keep you. In honor of those here tonight, and in memory of all those who have made this day possible, both living and dead, and I would add, especially in the memory of those master teachers that have been important in shaping all of our lives. We pause in a moment of thanksgiving and gratitude. Whether we consider natural reason or revelation, whether we turn to the Arabic texts of Al-Farabi, the Hebrew texts of Moses, Maimonides, or the Christian texts of Thomas Aquinas, 'tis very clear as Scripture says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But that wisdom is more than reason alone. Intellectual virtue, in the absence of moral prudence, is undirected, unguided, and uninspired. It is in that context, then, that we understand the words of St. John when he said, "No one should doubt that the Spirit is a friend of man." Logos calls us to a life of peace with ourselves, to a life that knows when to probe, when to reflect, and when to laugh. Logos calls us to a life of charity towards other human beings of all races and creeds. Logos allows us to recognize the stranger on the road to Emmaus. We pray today that we might be bold in our thoughts, moderate in our actions, and courageous in our defense of liberty, so that in the end, we too can share in those immortal words of Saint Cecilia. Lord, be safe, make safe our republic and hear our prayer, until that day when we shall be called before thee. Gaudiamus, so let us rejoice.